All right, welcome to the Green Innovation Group podcast. It's late, it's been a long day, but I have the most exciting thing left to do, and that is talk to you, Sebastian, from Slow Coffee. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You are all about coffee in all different shapes and sizes, but more about it at scale than the particular cup. What drove you into the coffee world, and why is coffee important from a sustainability perspective?
Well, that's a good question. So actually, we didn't start Slow as a coffee company. So the idea was to solve the deforestation issues in the tropical belt.
Okay.
And then we spent half a year of elaborating on how can we actually make an agroforestry model. So to create food from the forest rather than drive deforestation and do monoculture. Then it showed that coffee is the second largest commodity. So it's a huge volume market, and it's one of the large drivers of deforestation. So it's one of the 6 commodities that drives 80% of the tropical deforestation.
Because basically you cut the trees down today or burn in order to create fields.
Yeah, so exactly. You remove the forest, you do monoculture. So the problem here is that we have an economy that's all about yield. It's all about yield optimization. And obviously when you have sun-grown coffee, you have larger yields. So what happens is that the typically would be micro farmers. They lock and they do the deforestation, and then they can have more yield and improve their livelihood.
So already a lot of things coming out here. So yield-driven, then it's output-driven. You're only focusing on how many kilos come out at the end, less on how are they made, what is the quality, and so on. And then we're having some key concepts come in here as well, with coffee that's grown in the sun and coffee that's grown in the shade in the forest, where so you don't have to cut it down. So it was pure analysis, and this was the most effective way that you came up with to battle deforestation in the tropical belt. Yeah.
It is a huge market, and the coffee represents a nice value. That's the first step. Yeah. So you've called it slow coffee. It is actually just slow. Yeah. Because you can do a lot of stuff in the forest. Yeah. Coffee is a great starting point. So who knows what the future will bring for the slow journey. But for now it's coffee. Yes.
So the whole key thing is, what can we grow under the trees of valuable product rather than having them being cut down today? And how can we go from growing one thing at a time, monoculture, to growing multiple things at a time? Whether all of that is doesn't necessarily have to be products, all of them, but grow multiple things. And I think that's a good segue over to, if you, in simple terms, like you would explain it to a 5-year-old, how would you explain the slow model?
Right. I would probably start to compare it to monoculture. So when you cut down the trees and you have monoculture, you're cutting down the carbon sequestration. So there's no carbon sequestration in the trees anymore because we remove them. And when the trees are gone, the wildlife disappears. So birds and mammals and insects and so on. So now you have a situation where you've got no carbon sequestration, you've got no wildlife. You need to add chemicals, fertilizers, to improve your yield, because there's no natural habitat anymore, and therefore we need to add stuff. Yeah. So that is how it's done in the industrial way. Coffee was not always grown this way. So by growing it in the forest, you get the trees, and if you do it in a natural forest with a blend of fruit trees and maybe some of the endangered tree species. I mean, I think it's 50% of the world tree species that are endangered going towards 2050. So I mean, that's a lot of trees.
Yeah.
So by keeping these, you would keep the insects, you keep the birds, and eventually the mammals will come back. So this will be in harmony with nature, as a very strong contrast to a yield-optimized world, as much of the agricultural world is.
There's a lot of things happening in slow, and I think it could be great to just understand at the really high-level structure. You're growing coffee in the forest, right, or creating forest, right, and you're selling it to large companies in the Western world, mainly at the moment. So walk us through this very high-level model, and then we can dive into how you actually go about changing from monoculture to agroforestry and all the other wonderful things.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So what we learned back in 2017 in our feasibility study was that the coffee we drink changed hands up to 20 times.
Wow. Throughout the supply chain.
Throughout the supply chain, and that's a lot of middlemen.
Yeah.
And that's a huge value loss for these 15 or 20 middlemen, and that leads to value loss for the farmer.
Yeah.
Because they've got poor market access. Yeah.
So they're actually being paid very little, even when it's expensive in the supermarket.
We've seen extreme cases of very little, and they're being paid very late.
Yeah.
So the combination of the two is, of course, not very good.
Yeah.
So that is so for the farmer.
So what do you do that's different than that?
That's the consequence for the farmer, but yeah, this at the same time, you as a coffee drinker, you don't have certainty of what you're drinking. I mean, it changes hands 20 times. Where's the transparency in this?
So it's being blended and mixed and from warehouse to warehouse?
I'm just saying that the traceability is, of course, it's increasingly difficult from each time it changed hands. So those were two major learning points. And then, if you think about it from a value chain optimization point, how about we connect the farmer, the micro farmer, maybe 0.9 hectare farmer. It could be, we've got a farmer in Highlevel village called Mr. Kikeo. Yeah. He's got 0.9 hectares. I've met him several times. He's one of my favorites. I don't have favorites, but I really like him.
But he is.
He's really great. How about we connect him directly with a client in Denmark or in Sweden? Cut out the middleman, take the value, redistribute it back to nature, back to Kikeo and improve his livelihood, absorb the volume loss, because when we when we grow coffee in the forest, we obviously have a yield decrease, 20-25%. We can still absorb that and be competitive in Europe. And that was a game changer. That was what enabled us to actually create slow, because now we decide what we want to optimize for. We want to optimize for nature and livelihood rather than middlemen. But it's not possible if we don't have a market and the off-takers. So prices cannot go through the roof. People are not willing to actually pay for sustainability or, taking the ethical choice. Yeah. They might say they are, but when it comes to actually doing the transaction,
with the tenders, the large organizations.
Exactly. So for us, it was very clear that we needed to create something compatible. Yeah. Because if we couldn't, then we wouldn't succeed at scale. And scale is important when you talk about impact. So otherwise, it doesn't matter. Then we could, then we need to do something else, give money to an NGO or
then you're doing a little thing nice over here, and meanwhile half of the tropical forests are being cut down, and then what does it matter in the end? So what you're saying is that your study showed that there was enough value in the supply chain. It just wasn't distributed right. and actually in a quite unfair way as well. Where
absolutely unfair, yes. And unfair for the farmer, unfair for us, people on the planet.
Yeah.
Because we're cutting down trees.
Yeah.
So it's a redistribution, and I mean that was what launched the slow way. Yeah. And we started out working with local micro farmers like Kikeo, and first couple of years we had roughly 40 families.
Could you, if we take Mr. Kikeo, could you walk us through what has happened? You're meeting Mr. Kikeo for the first time. Yeah. He comes on board. He wants to go together with Slow. He has this small coffee farm. Yes. What changes are he undergoing in this model, and how does his coffee end up being grown in the forest and end up to a large Danish company?
So he was growing coffee in the forest, and the first part of the Slow journey was not regenerative focus, it was a preservation case. Yeah. Because if we needed to, the first thing is to stop deforestation and create the incentive for the farmers who were still growing coffee in the forest. Make the incentive to keep the forest. Yeah. So what we did was we did quite a thorough research and interviews with the families on how can we make, we call it 360 approach, because we needed to create an incentive for not cutting down trees and optimize for short-term yield. Yeah. So that's about, obviously it's about financial stuff. Yeah. So Kikeo's got a 2x income today. Yeah. One of the main drivers here is actually working capital. So what we do is we prepay 40% of the harvest, expected harvest, in September. The harvest starts around September, October, depending on weather.
So that's a huge difference from him getting his money late, many months, maybe even a year, who knows, later, to being paid part of it up front, so he doesn't have to go short-term solutions like cutting down the trees.
Or selling ripe. So that's what they do. They sell the coffee berries, and they represent so unprocessed coffee. Yeah. And by prepaying 40%, these 5 or 6 months, little depending on season, then he only sells processed coffee. So that alone is an increase of the livelihood or of the income of probably 50%. Okay. Just an instrument of working capital solutions. Yeah. This could be replicated all over, not even doing it in forest. So this is
That's just supply chain inefficiency that doesn't allow him to make the investment and then he's stuck forever in...
Yeah. Exactly. What we're doing, we're buying up to 75% of a production, Kikeo's production, for instance. We don't want to buy 100%. We don't want them to rely totally on Slow. Something could happen. So they need to have other income streams. But when we buy 50, 60, 75%, we're buying across the quality spectrum. So we're not just cherry picking the top 5, 10, 15% of the crops.
Because there's differences in coffee berries, and you get
screen sizes, and so you've got pea berries, the small ones, and then you've got screen size 13 and upwards. And then what you usually see specialty coffee companies do is they go in and buy the best, leave the rest. Problem is that the rest is not as valuable. So you're leaving goods that are hard to get a good price for. So we're buying across the spectrum and leave good stuff as well as not so good stuff. So these instruments were game-changing from the farmers. So a livelihood improvement of somewhere between 2x and 2.5x amongst the 40 farmers.
Meaning that, I don't know, let's say he had $100 to his family before Slow, and now it's 200. Just in very simple terms.
Well, on top of my head, Kikeo had somewhere around $1,700 USD annually, and now he's got the double. So that's a significant increase. Yeah.
And we're in Laos.
We're in Laos, in the Bolivian plateau. It's 1,000 to 1,200 meters high. It's close to Paxay. I was there November 19 last time, just before COVID hit, and then I was there in 18, and just the first, coming there, I think it was 12 months apart. You could actually see the improvements they've made. Some of them started building houses with bricks, so they don't have brick houses. I mean, that's a 10-year project. But just getting, the belief that you can actually do this and start creating a home with bricks and mortar, that's a huge step, and you could see that. So we could definitely feel that we're onto something from a livelihood point of view.
Because last time you were there, were no brick house or wooden clay house, exactly. and now there's a brick house.
But that's the foundation. Exactly, there's a foundation, or there's one room, or at least they are planning to do it, and not all of them. But I mean, this was back in November 19. A lot of happened since then. COVID has been difficult, and now we've got a team coming in these days actually again to reboot and so on. So yeah.
So how do you then? Because I mean, if the end client is a large Western company, they have tens of thousands of employees that needs to get their coffee on time, have high standards and so on, and you have very small farmers at the other end of that supply chain, and you've cut out all the middlemen who weren't efficient, but still sort of managed to aggregate all that. Mm-hmm. So how do you fulfill that demand for your large clients and
the first year was difficult because the model is very uncommon. They've never heard about it. They were like, can this really be true? So it was difficult to get started. But once they could show that it actually worked, and they got paid, and they got paid a lot more, second year was easier. So during 21, we added more than 100 new families. And we could add more. So now it's, I wouldn't call it a waiting list, but we've got interest. And so,
so you've developed the systems and the processes to aggregate the coffee from the micro farmers and make sure that it's shipped and processed.
We've got a team. We've got it now. I think they're 22, 23. On ground every day with Lars. So we're working with the families. We're doing individual development plans. Okay. So when you do a long-term contract, part of the payment goes into a development plan for the family.
So if I, as let's say a Danish company, I buy a long-term contract, as I understand, is it 7 years usually?
It depends. So somewhere around 5 to 7 years, whether it's regenerative or...
I pay for the coffee, but on top of that, I make a lot of good stuff happen for the micro farmers that deliver my coffee.
So I tend to say that we're not selling coffee. We're selling, storytelling and sustainability, and we're using coffee as an instrument. And there's some truth to that because if you by your coffee consumption can, first of all, make a financial difference for Kikeo, but also, so this could be. His development program could be, a rice cooker or a washing machine, or it could be fruit trees to increase revenue streams. So if that is part of your contract, that enables us to do a lot of storytelling. So now we're connecting on the machine, Kikeo explaining, I've got this washing machine. That enables me to spend more time with either the kids or, in the field or with the fruit tree program and so on.
So it's a virtuous cycle.
Exactly, very tangible. So we're trying to, I think that SLOW is used for organizations to make the sustainability or the climate action activities tangible. So because it is relatable. We have a break at the coffee machine. We've got, this is where you can communicate. It's a good platform.
think coffee is a great way to start as well, because I mean it's a high value product, and it's also a high focus product for the modern knowledge worker. Yeah, because it's also about providing stability for the farmers and for the supply chain. So the output, the sustainability output that is created is of course the livelihood. But if we look at the planet and the climate sustainability, is that there's less forest being cut down because you can grow it in the forest now, which is obviously great for biodiversity. And we can get back to later on how you enhance that as well by not just cutting down the forest, but also planting a lot of interesting stuff. Then I assume there's probably less waste in the supply chain. And you mentioned that the coffee is regenerative, and regenerative in simple terms means that whenever you take something, you put more back, be it CO2 or biodiversity. Could you explain how does that work? Because I think that's a very new concept to many, although it should be the standard, of course.
So let me explain that. But before, I just want to circle back to it's not just livelihood. So cacao is also on the environmental side, because if you take the carbon footprint of a monoculture coffee, it is roughly 4 kilos of carbon per kilo green bean or per kilo roasted coffee, and that would go close to zero and potentially negative because of the forest, because of the sequestration.
So that's the regenerative part.
That would be, in my world, that would still be, it's standing forest.
Yeah.
He's got the forest already. So the regenerative coffee in our world is what we do with the core, for instance. So that's an integrated facility company, and they've committed to buy a lot of coffee for a long time, 7 years. If we would go out and buy a monoculture, harmful as we talked about now, and convert it back to a forest, try to resemble nature as much as possible. That is our regenerative coffee, because here we're bringing back forest, the endangered tree species, some fast-growing trees and fruit trees and so on, and that will bring back.
So it's the opposite of cutting down or burning trees to create monoculture, is that you're growing all different kinds of plants that enable species to live there and absorb CO2.
Exactly.
A lot of companies are focused around the carbon, and that is, of course, important. But the next wave will be about biodiversity.
For sure.
And that is, we're solving both here. So trees are essential. And so,
definitely, and it's something we're seeing a lot with our clients, that when we work with, whether it's large pharmaceutical companies or others, that they're relatively long in scope 2, meaning that the energy consumption that they have, of course, they're doing projects to lower it, but they're buying the green energy, and then there's still a lot of CO2 challenges, but tackling biodiversity is a whole different animal. It's very intangible, it's very hard to invest in, and often the best advice is just to eat more plants in the cantina. So you provide a very tangible solution there on how to increase number of species.
So we do annual audits on this.
How does that work?
So we've got a partnership with Fortico. It's a Finnish spin-off of Helsinki University, and then they do audits every year. They go out and they measure and count.
A physical on the ground, and they'll say, okay, we have this square meter here. There's
this is what we this is what we see. This is what we count and measure, and we do that. So Fortico is doing it for the regenerative side. We've got a team of 6 people, our farm trace team. So it's a satellite monitoring solution for cacao's plot. And we go out every year, we count and measure all the trees and the tree species. And by adding these data points, the system provides an algorithm for calculating the carbon sequestration. So that gives us a good idea on how we're actually doing.
Amazing. And so what does that look? Do you have any examples of something that used to be monoculture and now you're 6-12 months in or something? Yeah.
So we did the first planting on the first core plot in September. So I mean, it is this height now, and we've experienced some unusual high mortality rate amongst the trees because we've got livestock walking around. So we had to do some replanting, and I mean, it's a learning process, So we're going to plant in waves, because when we talk forest, it's not just one canopy cover. We want to do different layers. So we're doing coffee being the first, and then we do 3 additional strata levels, and we cannot build that in
various heights of plants and vegetation.
Exactly. But that is impossible to plant in one wave. So we have to plant the highest waves first, or the highest trees first, wait a couple of years, and then you can plant again, and then they will grow up. So it is, I mean, there's a reason for the name. It is a slow process, and we cannot fast track it.
I find that so interesting that it's slow, but at the same time you're very ambitious and you're thinking at a large scale. It reminds me of a saying a friend of mine has, that slow, smooth is fast. That if you take your time to do it right, you will go faster. Because I think that one of the key things you're representing for me is a good solution to how to do the physical changes that are needed at a very large scale. Because time is of the essence, and scale is of the essence in the green transition. And we've seen that from the digital companies, that they can scale very, very fast. And that's amazing. But there are so many challenges when you're talking about the physical company, when you're talking about biological systems, when it's physical stuff, you're moving around the supply chain, and you might have shortages and other things. But we can't let that stop us, because the things that we need to change in order to save the planet is physical. So what have been your thoughts about that, about how to move at scale and be ambitious?
I think the advantage of being a startup and starting on a clean sheet is that you can you decide, early what you want to go for, and scale was essential for us. So we've designed a company that is for scale.
Were there any paths where you said, okay, that's not going to work because we're never going to be able to do thousands of tons doing this?
No, quite the opposite. Because if you want to do impact, I mean, 40 hectares is not enough, and then that's a lot of coffee, by the way. So you had, I mean, it was quite clear that we needed to build something scalable in terms of volume, and also in terms of crops. So there's 2 dimensions here. So one is that we can, do a lot of coffee in the forest. The other one is, if we will be, I think the estimate is 10 billion people in 2050 or something. I mean, that's a lot of people. Well, I mean, they require quite a lot of food. So we need to do more crops in the same forest. So that was the ambition, and to move into new crops, we need to have scale in one crop, financing the next step and the next step and the next step, and trying to unlock the market. So there's a lot of very good, sustainable cases out there. But what is usually missing is the off-takers. So there's not a strong link between the 2 worlds. And that, I think, Slow is a good example of actually enabling the off-takers to do this green transition.
So that's interesting as well, that because from the looks of it and to my understanding of your case, you're obviously doing a lot of good. Is it business or is it philanthropy? And how do you view that?
I mean, we've got investors. We've got it's a corporation, and it is. I mean, you can argue that this crisis we're in, both the carbon and biodiversity, someone in shirt, and maybe not like this, someone in a white shirt needs to fix it. I mean, it will be fixed by the market, not by governments or NGOs. So it is a commercial thing, and it needs to be market driven. So that was clear from the beginning.
And especially on consumer goods, it doesn't matter that the demand is there if you can pick and choose sustainable options.
I think that it's a super interesting movement we see in the market. Something happened post-COVID. We're more aware of what we are consuming. We are there's something happened in the agenda, and that is that is needed, because we are, as you said, in a hurry. So
yeah, for sure. That it's it's still an S curve, and we are in the early parts, but it's quite clear that the procurement departments are picking up, and if they're not already there, they're going to be there soon. And thankfully, more and more regulation is pulling in the right direction.
Yeah, so you've got the deforestation regulation on EU level saying you cannot import stuff that is driving deforestation. Hopefully, it will be approved this year, effect next year. So that will be one thing. There is something about procurement, because we've learned to optimize for price. It's about cost.
Yeah.
And that transition is, hopefully that will pick up and focus more about the ethical choice and the planet and so on. But I mean, we still got hope, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it looks like you can be competitive still. So I think that's also super interesting. I think we're seeing that in a lot of different places, that sustainability is also just good business. And I mean, not just to comply with the regulatory, but if you, like you said, if you look at it like, I'm not buying coffee, I'm buying value. What might that value be? That I'm buying happy and proud employees and easier talent attraction. I'm buying a different story for my salespeople when they're having coffee with clients, and for more or less the same price. And that's where we need to go. That it's also the right thing to do, but the value that I'm getting is higher than the price.
And I think that movement has started, and hopefully, so hopefully this can inspire an industry to look towards change, because it is needed. I mean, Slow is a small company; it's in a huge market. So hopefully we can inspire some of the larger players to actually start this transition and change the food system value chain around the coffee.
And it's the key thing. And the thing is that we're unfortunately much further away in the food value chain system than we are in the energy system, which of course also needs its own work. But for many cases, the sustainable business models are not there yet, and the supply chains are not optimized for it, which I think makes Slow super interesting as well. Thank you so much for coming in, Sebastian.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure.
So thank you so much for listening with us, whoever is out there, and I highly encourage you to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify or whatever else you're using. We will have more episodes to come, including another one with Sebastian, which I'm looking very much forward to. Thanks again.